Welcome to Good Burger Reviews. I'm here to do a brand new 2025 movie review. And the movie is Him.
So you're gonna have to ask yourself, what am I willing to sacrifice? This is everything. What are you willing to sacrifice? Say it. Say it. Everything.
This movie is directed by Justin Tipping, produced by Jordan Peele, starring Marlon Wayans, Julia Fox, Tyreek Weathers, and Gigi Emeta. Cameron Cade is a rising quarterback who suffers a potentially career-ending injury after being attacked by an unhinged fan. Just when all seems lost, Cam receives a lifeline when his hero, Isaiah White, offers to train him at an isolated compound. However, as the training accelerates, Isaiah's charisma turns into something darker, sending Cam down a disorienting rabbit hole that may cost him more than he bargained for. So this movie I started to get anticipated about when I found out that Jordan Peele was involved. Now initially I guess I mistaked the fact that he was the director. Justin Tipping's the director. Jordan Peele is just the producer. So what I'm gonna say is I think that's what makes the difference on this one. In my expectations, what I anticipated, and what we got as the end result. I'm going to go over the positives, the negatives, the mixed, and then give a rating to see whether or not it's worth going out to see him in the theater. And I have one question for you before we get started, and that is, are you ready for some football? Now, I thought I was ready for some football, and since we'd never had a football horror movie, I was quite intrigued and wondering what I would expect in a football horror movie, because the two of those things don't seem like they would blend well. And this movie did give me a blend of two movies, and when I think about the main two movies that this is a blend of, I think of Invincible meets Opus. So let's talk about the positives. This movie is filmed well. The cinematography is decent. There's lots of creative and artistic shots in here, and I think that goes to say with this movie's definitely trying to talk through metaphors, symbolism, and so forth. And I think a lot of that is told through what we're seeing on the screen. There is a lot of creativity here. The sound overall was decent. Now, there was a blend of music that they were playing. One song I took notice I'd recognized from Late Night with the Devil, and I started jiving with that, and then all of a sudden it turns into this newer hip-hop version that I'd never heard of before, and it was okay. But I would have to say, as someone who's not traditionally a fan of hip-hop music, there was a lot of hip-hop rap type songs in this, so it kind of took me out of it. Not that it was terribly placed. It seemed like the music did go with what they were trying to portray in this movie. There's a lot of cool things done with like lighting and sounds. There's this one scene where he's like in a hot tub or an ice tub, and then the lights go off and the imaging and the lights are cool. There's also parts where they go into like this CGI skeleton thing, and normally I don't like just random CGI in a movie, but here it was done pretty neat, and I did like the skeletal underneath of what we were seeing with these characters when they would go into their like skeletal form. And not to mislead anyone to think that this, like, he's going to be chased by skeletal creatures. This little aspect comes into the movie just a few times, maybe in the middle front and then at the end. So what am I mixed on this one? Well, I guess for me the big mix in him is Marlon Wayans. And we know Marlon Wayans from Scary Movie. He was in White Chicks. Him and his brother Damon Wayans, they did tons of movies back in the day. And I feel like I haven't seen Marlon in a movie in a while. Now I know that I'm highly anticipating Scary Movie 6, which I believe he's involved in. And I honestly have to say I think he does better at horror comedies or just straight up comedies. This was not a suited role for him. I felt like it was very blended, very mixed, and because of where we were going with the storyline, he was trying to be him, like the whole thing of being him, and he just wasn't him. He was kind of a mix of all his old hymns trying to be this new version of him, and the new version of him is just a mess. Now, I'm not going to say Marlon Wayans can't act. I think some of this, it's not that he couldn't act. I think his acting was okay. It was more of maybe the way this character was written and what the whole point of this story was. So before I get into the negatives, let me just give a little bit more of what was going down on this. So we open with the main star Cameron, or Cam, and he's this young man who is a very, very talented football player, and he's on the verge of breaking into the NFL, and he's going to be in the big leagues, but he's got to go to like this training camp with someone who's been a superstar in the NFL, and that's where we meet up with Isaiah White, who's already a major football player, played by Marlon Wayans. And he seems to be running this training camp. Now, that's when I started to get, obviously, with Invincible, it's the whole football theme. We have football players, trying to rise up, be superstars, be great, all the typical themes in those types of football movies, i.e. Invincible, or even a little bit of Any Given Sunday with the football themes.
There are a lot of people saying you could be the next great quarterback. I can already see it now. Cam running down the tunnel with the crowd chanting his name.
I hear you've been invited to train with legend Isaiah White himself.
And that's where I started getting the Opus vibe, because Isaiah White was very much like the character John Malkovich that was in Opus, who was a superstar, who was inviting people to his whatever, place, and then it turned out to be something different. And that's exactly what happens in this movie. Isaiah White is inviting Cam to train, be ready to get taken on to a team, the Saviors, which I thought was specifically named the Saviors for a reason. And it's not what it seems. It's not a typical training camp. Now, due to the exposition dump and like all these quick clips that were shown at the beginning of the film, we knew that Cam was big into football and that his father was heavily involved in his life, but then his father passed away. Now, so we have our main star is a grieving character. Once he gets to this training camp, which is out in the middle of nowhere, and he's got to turn in his cell phone so he can't have contact with anyone, and he starts going through rigorous trainings. But these trainings are just a little bit different than what you would expect in a football camp. I mean, it was similar to football activities, but then it just starts getting rough and wild and weird. And before you know it, this training camp turns out to be very much like a cult group, an occult, just like John Malkovich in Opus. I did mention Late Night with the Devil, how there was a cult involved in that. It was very similar to that because it's on this very big scale. High-end type of people are running it. And I'll just say here, this is where we're going to get into the negatives, because the blend of all this, to me, it just was a mess, a flop, a disaster. The biggest negative, and what I learned about movies this week is, I was a little concerned about The Long Walk and him based on, their premises. They seemed different and strange. And I thought, how the heck am I going to like a movie like The Long Walk when you just have a bunch of guys walking for the entire movie? But it was the characters. The characters in that movie were great. The characters in this movie, I couldn't get with them. The young character, I felt like there was no connection with him. There was no connection to him wanting it. There was no connection to his family, his father, his mother, who's still alive, who's very involved in what he's doing. I think he has a brother, someone else, other family members that are coming in and out. It just seemed like there was no real connection with him. And at the end of the day, I couldn't find a connection with the main character. And then I thought, well, maybe could I find a connection with Marlon Wayans? And it was the same thing. I mean, it felt like he was going for something, but honestly, I couldn't figure out what. Because in some moments, he's acting like this new father figure to Cam. And in other moments, he's acting like a crazy drill sergeant. He's just requesting nutso stuff. Plus, just kind of the way he talks, what they get into. There's just a lot of unnecessary characters floating around that seem to have no point. I couldn't figure out what the point of some of them were. So, like, there's these side characters. Like, so Julia Fox plays his wife, and she's just kind of all painted up. Like, she's like something maybe you'd see on Idol Fans or whatever they call it, Fans Only. She's all dolled up and beautiful, but she's overdone. The giant lips, extra makeup, bleach blonde, it's almost too much. And she's just she takes him to a party in one scene, and it turns into like this like gladiator thing, and it's like a sacrifice. So each day is like they're presenting like a title of the day, like today's resilience, the next day is strength, the next day is, the one day is sacrifice. It's the important things that you need for learning about football and training in football. But then as you go through the day, it's like this demented version of it. And Marlon Wayans is pushing this kid to limits. And at points I thought, was this kind of a copycat of the movie The Home, where they were stealing the youth from people in this nursing home? And because he makes this comment like, oh, I'll steal the youth out of you. And I thought, oh, is this where we're going? Because there's lots of blood injection scenes. And it's like, I felt like, what were they really doing? And it was very unclear about what they really were doing, but besides just being deceitful and nasty. It seemed as though Marlon Wayans was trying to take his blood or give him his blood. Honestly, I couldn't figure it out, because it was like, are you trying to give him your blood so that he can be the GOAT, as they would say, the greatest of all time? Or are you trying to take it for yourself? And there's this other side character who's like this demented fan that's painted up as well. She kind of seemed like an evil doppelganger of Marlon's wife, but she's really ugly, and she's just like, she hates the football, she hates the camp, and she's just like on the outside. That was also reminded me of Opus, because there was people on the outside just as you go into like the camp. And it's the same thing here. And she's like spitting all over the window, and then somehow she sneaks into this place, and there's a scene with her in there where she battles Cam and Marlon, and it didn't make no sense. And then nothing happens with her. Like, I guess she dies. They kill her somewhat. I don't know. It was weird. It was very weird. Complete spoilers here. We're going to get into the end. So it ends with this, like, at this party, it turns into like this bizarre battle, which becomes some sort of sacrifice. And when he comes out of it, it's like he's in the middle of a football field, and there's all these guys like judges or like leaders of this whatever cult or whatever you want to call it. And he just decides that he's not down with all this and kills them. The end. Like, it was very basic in that part. So like, I felt like this movie was trying to be very elevated because it was very symbolic. It was doing all sorts of images, all sorts of symbolism. But then it kind of had a very basic end. He just kind of, and then it just cuts like boom, done, end. And this movie was short, but it felt long. Like it said it was an hour and a half, and I felt like it was really only an hour and 12 minutes of movie. Like once we got into it, but like here I feel like maybe they could have put a little bit more in, because like none of these side characters, none of anybody was developed. There was just no development in any of it. And I think that's where this movie flops for me. Besides the weirdness and me not completely understanding the symbolism and the metaphors that they're trying to put across. You know, I'm a football fan. I wouldn't say I'm a major football fan. I watch football, but like, I guess it's an allegory for football. Like, you know, I understand that they're trying to push this whole like getting into football and the life of the NFL, the public life, the rich life. You know, it's wild, and you deal with characters similar to this. Obviously, hopefully it's not really that extreme, but it is very extreme with the way people in the limelight have to live their lives. So I'm going to get down to business on this one, because honestly, I really wasn't a fan of it. And I'm going to say that Him is a veggie burger. And I was very close to giving it a spam. And the reason I'm not going to give it a spam is I felt like there was some good cinematography, some great imaging, and decent work. It's a well put together movie as far as that, the technical aspects, you know, and it's not like a real garbage. It's just messy, and it doesn't seem to get the points home. I would probably skip it overall, unless you're like a big football fan. If you're big time into the cultic movie, I would say maybe like a Midsommar a little bit, or as I've already mentioned, Opus, The Home, things like that. If you really love those types of movies, then you might be able to find some joy in this one. But if you're big into other types of subgenres, you're definitely going to want to skip this one. Well, this is Johnny with Good Burger Reviews, and I guess all I can say is don't forget to stay scared of those crazy, obsessive NFL football recruiting, drill sergeant, nightmarish, cultic football trainers.